The wind carried dust through the narrow streets of Red Hollow, a forgotten town where salvation came only in whispers and bullets. On that sweltering Sunday afternoon, the townspeople gathered around the wooden platform near the church, eyes fixed on the preacher, Reverend Dalton, whose voice boomed like thunder through the dry air. "Let your sins be uncovered," he roared, sweat glistening on his forehead. "Let your faces reflect the purity within." A hush swept over the crowd as the women obeyed, one by one lifting the veils from their faces, until only one remained covered. She stood at the edge of the gathering, wrapped in grey linen, her face hidden behind a dark veil. Still, motionless, as though untouched by heat or pressure. Some turned to look, others averted their eyes, afraid to question why she defied the call. Reverend Dalton paused, narrowing his eyes. "Sister," he said, pointing, will you not remove your veil and show yourself before God?" Silence followed. The air thickened with anticipation. The wind died. "I said, will you reveal yourself?" the preacher demanded, voice hard now, accusatory. Still she didn't move. A child's voice pierced the stillness. "Sarah?" A young boy in the front row stood on his toes, eyes wide with recognition. "Mama, that's Sarah! That's her! It's really her!" Gasps rippled through the crowd. The veiled woman stiffened. Whispers flew from mouth to mouth like wildfire. "Sarah? Could it be she's alive?" The preacher blinked. The sheriff stepped forward. The boy's mother pulled him back quickly, but his words had already shattered the silence. The woman didn't run. She didn't speak. Her hand moved, just a fraction, a twitch near the veil. But she stopped herself. Her voice, low and rough from disuse, carried just enough. "I don't go by that name anymore." Even then, some people believed they recognized her. Others denied it. She had changed. Time does that. But something in her bearing, in the way she stood without fear or apology, struck a chord. Sheriff Clay Morrison studied her from behind his badge, his fingers resting near the grip of his revolver. He didn't draw. Not yet. The preacher stepped back, clearly rattled. "This woman," he declared, trying to regain control, "defies the Lord's will." But now the town's attention had shifted. Not to righteousness, not to sin, but to her. She turned and walked away, slowly, not looking back, and the veil stayed on. If stories like this keep you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. There's more to uncover in Red Hollow. 2 months before the veil caught the town's eye, she had arrived unnoticed. The stagecoach rolled into Red Hollow at dusk, its wheels groaning under the weight of time and distance. Among the dust-covered passengers, no one paid her much mind, just another wanderer wrapped in grey. A silent figure with no name, no smile, no past. She stepped down, left no forwarding address, and walked toward the outskirts without asking for directions. Her boots, worn and steady, carried her to a small abandoned cabin behind the hills. It was half-rotted, but it stood, and that was enough. She paid old Widow Maureen in silver to use the place. No words beyond what was needed, no questions answered. People noticed, they always did. She never came into town unless necessary. When she did, she kept to herself, purchasing flour, cloth, candles. Her voice was soft, almost broken, like it hadn't been used in years. But every Thursday she visited the graveyard. She brought no flowers. Just stood at the back among the unmarked stones and stayed for hours without moving. Children whispered. "Witch," some said. "Ghost," said others. But Widow Maureen, whose husband had died in the war, knew better. She saw something familiar in the woman's eyes, grief that didn't speak, just echoed. One evening, as the sun sank blood-red into the hills, Maureen offered her tea on the porch. "You're not the first to carry silence like a coffin," she said. The woman nodded once, accepting the cup, but saying nothing. Bit by bit, the town began to forget their curiosity. A mysterious woman with veils and scars of silence was easier to live with than rumors unanswered. Except for Sheriff Clay Morrison. He wasn't a man to gossip, but he watched. He saw how she moved through town like a shadow, how she avoided eye contact, how her hands trembled just slightly when coins exchanged. He asked the blacksmith, the shopkeeper, even Maureen. No one knew her name, or at least no one admitted they did. And then there was Fergus Green, the merchant who'd once run with rougher crowds before settling in Red Hollow. When he saw her at the general store one afternoon, his face drained of colour. He didn't say anything. Not then. But later that night he dug through an old box of papers, the kind best left forgotten, and pulled out a crumpled, faded wanted poster. The ink had bled, but the name was still there. So was the sketch. Scar beneath the eye, eyes that haunted. He sat by the fire for a long time staring at that face. Next morning the poster was gone. Burned. But Fergus's eyes never left her again. Tommy hadn't meant to speak her name. The moment it left his lips, his mother's hand clamped over his mouth, her eyes wide with fear. But the damage had already been done. Later that day, the boy sat on the porch of the schoolhouse, fidgeting with a wooden toy. Sheriff Clay crouched beside him, not harsh, not gentle, just curious. "Where'd you know her from, son?" he asked. Tommy looked down. "When I was little, before we moved here, she lived near our ranch. Did you ever talk to her?" The boy nodded. "She gave me water once. I was lost in the hills. Pa said I shouldn't talk about it, said she was trouble." Clay stood, the weight in his chest heavier than he expected. Children didn't lie like that, not with names. Back at the sheriff's office, he opened the old town ledger. Surnames. Records, families. There had been a Delgado family once far east of Red Hollow. Vanished after a fire. One survivor listed, female. No first name. No age. He stared at the empty space where a name should have been. Out by the widow's cabin, the woman sat alone that evening, her hands clasped over her knees, breathing slow and shallow, her veil still on. She'd heard the name too. Heard it float through the crowd like a bullet with no sound. Sarah. The name dug like a blade into her chest. It wasn't just a name. It was her father's voice calling from the porch, her brother's betrayal echoing in the canyon. It was the night the barn burned, the morning she rode into the desert, gunpowder under her nails and blood on her saddle. She'd buried that name with the past. Along with everything it cost her. But names don't stay buried. Rumors sprouted like weeds. At the saloon, men muttered, "Was she running? From who? From what?" Reverend Dalton preached that Sunday with fire in his eyes, his sermon aimed not at sin, but at secrets. He didn't mention her directly, but the town felt it. Fergus Green drank in silence at the end of the bar, his hands trembling as he reached for the bottle. The memory of that poster lingered like smoke in his mind. Clay visited the cabin the next morning. She opened the door before he knocked. "You want to ask me," she said, her voice dry, almost amused, "only if you want to answer." They stood there, silence between them, thick and brittle. "I don't lie," she said, "but I don't confess either." He nodded once, then tipped his hat and left. Back in town, people stopped talking to her, not out of fear, but reverence. She was no longer just the veiled woman. She was something else, a story unfolding in slow, measured steps, and none of them knew if the ending would be redemption or reckoning. The peace didn't last. 3 riders came into Red Hollow at midday, their horses foaming and restless. Dust cloaked their coats, but their eyes were sharp, too sharp for strangers. They dismounted without words, boots thudding like war drums on the wooden boards outside the saloon. One of them, tall with a scar slicing through his left eyebrow, walked straight to Fergus Green. "Looking for someone," he said, dropping a coin on the counter. "Woman, wears a veil, goes by no name." Fergus didn't answer. The man leaned in closer. "She used to go by Sarah." The name hung like a threat. Clay heard about it before the hour passed. He found the 3 men near the stable, feeding their horses like nothing had happened. He watched them, hand close to his holster. They watched back, smirking. "You boys lost?" Clay asked. "Just visiting," said the scarred one. "Looking for an old friend." Clay didn't blink. "We're short on friends here." That night, Sarah didn't sleep. She knew before they knocked. The wind always changed when they were near. By morning, the air in town had shifted. Fear tasted like iron. The preacher whispered to his flock that demons wore veils now. Children stayed indoors. Clay walked to the widow's cabin with tension in his steps. "You knew this was coming," he said when she opened the door. She nodded. "They after you?" "Yes." He studied her in silence. "What did you do to them?" "What I had to." "Is that going to get people killed?" Her gaze didn't flinch. "Not if you let me leave." "No," he said, voice low. "That's not how we do things here." She almost smiled. "Then you better decide, Sheriff. Are you going to protect me or turn me in?" His answer didn't come easy. That afternoon, she went to the well for water. The 3 gunmen were waiting. "Evening, Sarah," said the scarred one. "You look different." She said nothing. The smallest one stepped closer, grinning. "What's under the veil? The same pretty face we remember? Or did time and guilt eat it away?" She kept her hands visible, empty. But her eyes burned. Then Clay's voice rang out. "Back away from her, now!" The tension snapped like a pulled string. Guns weren't drawn yet, but they hovered near holsters. Scar-Eye spat in the dirt. "We ain't done." Clay didn't answer. That night the veiled woman sat on Maureen's porch, her knees tucked under her chin. The widow lit a lamp and placed it between them. "You always carry the storm with you?" Maureen asked. Sarah lowered her head. "I try to outrun it. Doesn't work." For the first time the widow called her by name. "Sarah," she said softly, "some storms you face or they follow you forever." She didn't reply, but for a long time she didn't move either. The desert called her again. At midnight, Sarah slipped away from the cabin. No goodbye, no hesitation. Just the sound of her boots brushing sand and dry leaves as she moved silently toward the hills. Behind her, Red Hollow slept, or tried to. She knew they wouldn't stop. Men like those didn't forgive, didn't forget. Their code was fire and blood, and she had broken it long ago. She crossed the dry gulch, then the old rail bridge. By sunrise, she'd be gone, the town spared. At least that was the plan. But Sheriff Clay Morrison wasn't asleep. He found her trail before the moon reached its peak. Hoofprints, slender steps, eastward, toward the place where the desert swallowed names. He saddled his horse and rode hard, wind stinging his eyes, dust burning his throat. He didn't know why exactly. Duty, maybe. Maybe something else. By dawn he found her beneath a crumbling cliff, her horse tied to a thorn bush, her back against the rock. She didn't look surprised to see him. "You should have stayed," she said. He dismounted. "You shouldn't be running." "I'm not running, I'm leading them away." He crossed his arms. "You really think that'll work?" "No," she said quietly. "But I'd rather they find me than burn your town." Clay leaned against his saddle. "You want to tell me now? Everything?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she began. "I was 17 when I rode with them. Thought it was freedom. Thought he loved me. Scar-Eye?" "No," she said, shaking her head. "He followed the man I followed, Elias Brand." Clay stiffened. That name carried weight, not just stories, wounds. "He used to say we'd build something bigger than law," she continued. "Said the world owed us. I believed him." She paused. "Until the night we hit a ranch east of here. They didn't need to kill the boy." But Elias said witnesses were a problem. Her hands trembled. "I pulled my gun on him. Told him I was done. He laughed, said no one leaves. But you did." "I did." Her voice cracked. "And I paid for it." Clay didn't speak for a long time. "You ever kill?" she asked finally. He nodded. "Too many times." She looked at him then, and though her veil stayed on, he saw something break. "How you think there's peace for people like us?" "No," he said, "but maybe there's balance." She smiled, barely. They camped in silence that night, the fire small and the stars endless above. Before sleep claimed her, she whispered, "If they catch me, don't try to save me. Just bury me where it's quiet." Clay didn't promise. He just kept watch. Somewhere beyond the ridge, the wind shifted. The hunt wasn't far behind. Red Hollow woke to smoke on the horizon. 3 days had passed since Sarah vanished into the desert. Some believed she was gone for good. Others, like Fergus Green, knew better. He stood on the porch of his store with a rifle across his knees, watching the trail. Then came the 4th day. The gang returned. Not 3 riders, but 7 now. Hardened men with empty eyes, led by a figure the townsfolk didn't recognize. But Sarah would have. Elias Brand. He wore a black duster and rode a pale horse, calm, controlled, deadlier than the desert behind him. They rode straight down Main Street without firing a shot, a silent promise of worse to come. Clay stood in their path. Elias dismounted, dusting off his coat. "We're just here for a reunion," he said. "I don't care what you're here for," Clay replied. "You're not getting her." Elias smiled. "Oh, Sheriff, I always get what I came for." He handed a paper to the blacksmith, official, signed with the seal of the Arizona Territory. Wanted, Sarah M. Delgado crimes, robbery, arson, murder. Reward, $2,000, dead or alive. The paper spread faster than fire. Some townsfolk folded their arms, others looked away. But a few stared at that number with hunger. That night, arguments broke out. At the saloon, 2 brothers nearly came to blows over whether to protect Sarah or turn her in. At the church, Reverend Dalton thundered about cleansing sin before it swallowed them all. The town was splitting at the seams. Maureen refused to speak to anyone. She stayed by the fireplace, her shotgun loaded beside her. Clay walked alone through the streets, the wanted poster burning in his hand. He couldn't stop the bounty. The law was clear. But he could choose his side. When he returned to his office, Fergus was waiting. "I knew it the second I saw her," Fergus said. "Didn't say a word, but now the whole town knows." Clay nodded. "So what happens next?" Fergus looked out the window. "Depends on whether she comes back." And she did. At dawn, Sarah rode in through the back trail, dirty, hollow-eyed, but upright. Her veil gone, her face bare. She walked into the saloon like a ghost reborn. Everyone turned. "I won't run anymore," she said, "but I won't die quietly either." No one spoke. She left the saloon and walked to Clay's office. "They'll burn this town to find me. They'll have to get through me first." Sarah looked down. "You shouldn't have to fight my war." Clay stepped forward. "Then help me end it." And in that still morning light, 2 broken souls stood together, not to surrender, but to resist. They struck at twilight. First came the fire. Dry hay and oil-soaked cloth thrown through open windows, flames swallowing the tailor's shop and licking at the edges of the general store. Panic swept through Red Hollow like a stampede. Women screamed, men grabbed buckets, children cried out for parents. Then came the demands. Elias stood on the church steps flanked by his men. His voice was cold steel. "You hand her over, or we'll burn this town until there's nothing left but ash and regret." Inside the sheriff's office, Sarah loaded a rifle with steady hands. "They won't stop," she said, "even if they get me." Clay watched the flames rise outside. "Then we don't give them anything." She turned to him, her eyes unwavering. "The town will fall for me." "No," he said, stepping closer. "The town will fight for itself, but they'll need a reason." At the town square, panic shifted to confusion when Sarah stepped into view, barefaced, rifle slung across her shoulder. Some gasped, others stared. "I know who you think I am," she shouted, "and you're not wrong." She looked around, her voice rising. "I did ride with them. I did run. I did kill." Murmurs. "But I left them. I turned my back on blood and bullets, and now they've come for me because they think I'm still theirs." She pointed toward the flames. "But I'm not. I belong to no one, and I won't run again." The crowd hushed. Even the fire seemed to quiet. "If you want to hand me over, I won't stop you," she continued. "But you know what they'll do after. You've seen the fire. This isn't about me anymore. This is about who owns this town, us or fear." A long silence followed. Then Maureen stepped forward, shotgun in hand. "No one takes her," the widow said. Then Fergus. Then the blacksmith. One by one, townsfolk raised whatever they could carry. Axes, pistols, tools turned weapons. Clay stepped beside her. "You gave them what they needed. Sarah's hand shook for the first time in days. The stand began at the church. Elias's men rode in, but found resistance. Windows darkened, rooftops manned, shots fired from hidden corners. It wasn't a battle. It was a rebellion. Elias shouted orders. His voice met defiance. His men hesitated. At the height of the clash, Clay stood at the top of the church steps, revolver drawn. Sarah stood beside him. When Elias's men charged, they didn't find prey. They found a town ready to burn back. By nightfall, the fires had dimmed. Smoke lingered, but the worst had passed. Sarah stood among the ruins, veil long gone, ash clinging to her skin. And for the first time, the people of Red Hollow saw her not as a mystery, but as one of their own. The sun reached its peak, high and merciless above the blood-stained dirt of Main Street. A silence thicker than smoke gripped Red Hollow. The townsfolk stood at a distance, weapons down, but eyes sharp. Sarah stepped forward alone, her boots slow against the wooden boards, each step a memory. Elias Brand waited near the well, hands loose by his sides. The others kept their distance. This wasn't their fight anymore. "You finally came," he said, voice too calm. "I've always been coming," Sarah replied. He tilted his head. "You look different." "I am." She stopped 10 paces away, close enough to see the grey in his beard, the hollow where charm had once lived. He hadn't aged well, evil never did. "I told them you'd come crawling," he said. "It's who you are." "No," she said, steady. "That's who I was when I believed you." He laughed, low and bitter. "You think this town makes you clean? You think dying for them changes what you did?" "I'm not dying for them," she answered. "I'm ending this for me." His hand twitched, hers didn't. The world narrowed, wind stopped, time paused. Then it began. 2 shots rang, one after the other. Sarah dropped to one knee, chest heaving. Elias staggered, clutching his side, blood blooming fast. "You never had it in you," he gasped. She stood, face pale but firm. "I do now." He lunged. She fired again. He fell. Around them, silence collapsed into gasps and murmurs, but she didn't hear them. Her breath came in short bursts. A red stain grew across her side. Clay reached her just as she fell. "No, no, stay with me," he said, cradling her. "I didn't miss," she whispered. He looked around. The gang was scattering, their leader gone. Red Hollow still stood. "You didn't," he said. Her hand gripped his. "Tell them." "I wasn't always like this," she said. "You don't have to explain." But she already had. They carried her into the church, Maureen at her side, whispering prayers without faith, only hope. Hours passed, blood-soaked linen. She fought with teeth clenched, her eyes flickering open, then shut again. Clay never left her side. Outside, the townspeople moved with quiet purpose, rebuilding, tending to the wounded, watching the horizon, and waiting. By the time the moon climbed high, a soft breath escaped Sarah's lips. Not a gasp, not a cry, just peace. Clay held her hand tighter, not ready to let go. But she didn't let go either. Her eyes opened once more. "You stayed," she said. "Always." She closed her eyes again. And this time, she slept. Morning broke soft and golden over Red Hollow. Smoke still lingered in the air, but the scent of gunpowder had faded. What remained now was silence and breath. Sarah's breath. She woke slowly, pain slicing through her side, but life still there, stubborn and pulsing. Maureen sat beside her bed, knitting in the corner like nothing in the world could shake her hands. Clay stood near the window, arms crossed, watching the sunrise as if it might give him answers. "You're alive," Maureen said gently, not looking up. Sarah tried to speak, but only managed a rasp. Clay turned. "We weren't sure. You lost a lot of blood." "I'm still here," she whispered. He nodded. "And so is the town." "Thanks to you." The next days passed in fragments. Rest, bandages, short walks under the sun. Children brought her flowers. The blacksmith left bread on her porch. Even Reverend Dalton tipped his hat without a sermon. Something had shifted. She no longer wore the veil. It lay folded on her nightstand, untouched since the fight. The wind sometimes lifted its edge, but she never reached for it again. One afternoon, Governor Wade himself rode into town with 2 deputies, dust trailing behind them like shadows. He came not to arrest, but to pardon. He spoke in front of the church, reading from a parchment marked with gold ink and dry authority. For bravery, for sacrifice, and for aiding in the defense of Red Hollow against known outlaws of the Arizona Territory, all charges against Sarah M. Delgado are hereby nullified. The town applauded. Sarah said nothing, just stood beside Clay with eyes that watched the horizon more than the people. After the ceremony, Clay offered her his hand. "I never thought I'd see the day you'd stand in sunlight without hiding." She looked at him. "I never thought I'd want to." They walked through town together. The schoolhouse had been spared, though smoke had kissed its roof. Inside, children scribbled words on slates, laughter echoing between walls once cold with silence. Tommy ran up to her. "Miss Sarah," he said, breathless, "will you tell us a story sometime?" She crouched beside him, ignoring the pain in her ribs. "Only if it's not about me." He grinned. "Then make one up." She ruffled his hair. "Deal." That evening she took a piece of chalk and wrote her name on the schoolhouse wall. Sarah M. Delgado. No longer a warning, not a whisper. A name given, not hidden. Clay leaned beside her, arms folded. "So," he said, "will you stay?" She looked out at the hills. "Maybe. For now." And with the breeze stirring her hair, the veil forgotten behind her, she smiled like someone who had finally remembered who she was. Weeks passed, and peace held. The scars of fire still marked the edges of Red Hollow, but grass had begun to grow again near the chapel, and children no longer jumped at the sound of hoofbeats. Sarah stayed. She never said it outright, never signed a lease or bought land, but her presence became steady as stone. Mornings found her at the schoolhouse, helping children spell their names. Afternoons passed at Maureen's porch, mending clothes, sipping bitter coffee. The town no longer whispered. They nodded, waved, even smiled. They had seen her at her worst. Now they saw her whole. Sheriff Clay came by often, always under the pretense of checking on something. A cracked window, a new teacher's chair, the weight of the new lock on the saloon doors. But it wasn't the town he was checking on. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the world gold, Sarah sat on the steps of the schoolhouse, watching Tommy chase fireflies. He stopped beside her, panting. "Are you going to leave again?" She shook her head. "No, not anymore." "Good," he said. "It's better when you're here." Clay approached from the street, a paper in hand. "You've been requested to teach full-time," he said. Sarah raised an eyebrow. "By who?" he smirked. "Everyone." She took the paper, read it, and folded it gently. "Well," she said, "guess I'm a schoolmarm now." Clay's smile softened. "I'll try not to cause too much trouble." Later, in the quiet of her cabin, she opened a small wooden box beneath the bed. Inside was the veil, folded, untouched, and now unnecessary. She carried it to the hill overlooking Red Hollow. The wind tugged at its edges. With a deep breath, she let it go. It danced through the air, fluttered, and disappeared into the horizon. No one ever saw it again. The next day, a stranger rode into town, dusty, tired, and curious. He asked for a drink, asked for supplies, then leaned over to Fergus Green and said, "Someone told me a woman used to live here, wore a veil, said she was trouble." Fergus leaned back, arms crossed. "We got a schoolteacher named Delgado. She's sharp. Good shot, too." The stranger blinked. "Same woman?" Fergus shrugged. "Maybe. But folks don't call her trouble anymore." The traveler walked outside and spotted her in the yard, surrounded by children. He hesitated, then asked, "Why don't you wear the veil no more?" She didn't turn, just kept her eyes on the sky. "Because I'm no longer hiding." And that was the end of it, but not her story. Because Red Hollow would speak her name for years to come, not in fear, not in shame, but with pride. Sarah M. Delgado, the woman who stood when others ran, the outlaw who became something more, the name that lived on. If you were moved by Sarah's journey, don't forget to subscribe. There's always another tale waiting. Click the next video to keep riding through stories like this one.